Great. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Bay Area Town Hall. It's kind of our second meeting on the where we're going to have Kate Hartley, Bay Area Housing Finance Authority Director, and we're going to talk about the issue of not only housing but the proposed regional bond measures. Let me kind of set the stage a little for you. We all are aware that the lack of affordable housing, much less access, is one of the Bay Area's most demanding challenges. What are solutions and how do we solve the problem? Assemblymember Chu captured the issue and solution tool for the Bay Area, saying the housing crisis in the San Francisco Bay Area is regional in nature and too great to be addressed individually by the region's 100 cities and 9 counties. He wasn't talking about taking the decision-making away, but more just the ability to be able to provide that throughout the cities. Now, via Chu's bill, Assembly Bill 1487, the California legislature established Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, known as BAHFA, and that was in 2019. BAHFA was established to meet the Bay Area's need to produce more housing, preserve more affordable housing, and protect vulnerable tenants. These 3 P's define BAHFA's mission: produce, preserve, and protect. Now, BAHFA they have programs they're doing, but they have the power to place ballot measures before Bay Area voters to raise revenue, to build and preserve more housing, and to protect tenants. The proposed regional affordable housing bond measure that we're here to talk about is what we want to learn more about and discuss. This is to be able to give insights into what is being proposed during the process for it. Now, this is a great opportunity for all of you to give feedback during the proposal process. The special town hall guest is Kate Hartley, Executive Director of the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. So let me turn the meeting over to our Bay Area League Director, past President, Roma Dawson. Her portfolio is housing and homelessness social policy. She also serves on the San Jose Housing and Community Development Committee as Commissioner. Roma will introduce Kate Hartley and facilitate our town hall Q&A and content. So Roma, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And for those of you that don't know Kathleen, she is retired from ABAG and spent many years analyzing state legislation. So she's quite handy to have around. And I want to thank Sherry Thomas and Marianne Shovelin, 2 wonderful board members who are helping behind the scenes. And do enter your questions into chat during our presentation. And again, we really welcome your comments as well as questions. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kate Hartley, BAHFA's first director. And I want you to know some of her bona fides before we get into her presentation. Under Kate's direction, BAHFA is emerging as the cornerstone of MTC ABAG's expanded regional housing portfolio. Previously, she worked as the Chief Lending and Investment Officer for the San Francisco-based nonprofit Housing Accelerator Fund, where she implemented a new financing and construction model that produced housing for homeless people more quickly and cost-effectively than conventional approaches. Before joining the Housing Accelerator Fund, Kate served as Deputy Director and then Director of the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, where she led a $2 billion public housing preservation and rehabilitation program that converted 3,500 rental units from federal to nonprofit ownership. She previously served in a senior position in the city of Berkeley's Health, Housing, and Community Development, where she worked on financial feasibility analyses for new affordable housing developments, underwrote loan applications for new housing construction, and rehab projects, and basically negotiated for the city of Berkeley with developers, lenders, and investors. Her 3 decades, she must have started as a baby, but at any rate, her 3 decades of housing experience also include time as a senior development specialist with the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency, a financial consultant for the California Housing Partnership, and in general project management for private, public, and nonprofit developers, and service as a financial advisor to nonprofit developers and governmental agencies. She has a BA from University of California, Santa Barbara, and an MA in jurisprudence, in other words, she's a lawyer, and social policy from UC Berkeley. And Kate, we're now ready for your presentation, and we are so grateful you're giving us more of your time.
Roma, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And Kathleen, thank you as well. I'm so happy to be here with you all tonight, and very happy to be providing an update. The work that the League does is tremendous. I really value everything you're doing. And so thank you for taking an interest in our bond measure and in BAHFA. I'm going to share screen, and then we can get rolling. Okay. As Kathleen said, we were created in 2019 by state legislation. David Chu is a hero. He took the needs of the Bay Area with a lot of great input from long discussions and participation by so many stakeholders, and created BAHFA. Our enabling legislation is the San Francisco Bay Area Housing Finance Act. Our core power is to raise revenue region-wide, and as Kathleen said, we're about investing in the 3 Ps: new construction, or production, preservation, and tenant protections for low-income residents, especially to prevent displacement and prevent homelessness. Our mandate also requires, and we are committed to, collaboration with cities and counties. We want to add value to some great work that is already ongoing. And we also want to work to improve our housing delivery system and try to create beneficial systems change. So the 2024 Regional Housing Bond, it will be between 10 and 20 billion. The final number will be decided by our boards. We're doing polling right now to help inform that decision. It'll be before the voters, of course. We will disperse the funds over 10 to 15 years, depending on the size of the bond. And the eligible uses of those bond proceeds are outlined and set forth in our enabling legislation. Not too much has changed for the better since 2019, when BAHFA was created. At last count, we had about 37,000 unhoused neighbors in the Bay Area, and hundreds of thousands more who are just a paycheck away or a health crisis away from homelessness. Over the last year, we've been going all around the Bay Area, talking to a wide variety of people and groups, and we've heard in pretty compelling detail the problems with housing unaffordability in our region. So many people have talked to us about, and you all know this too, how hard it is when you have to be a super commuter because you've moved farther and farther away from your job just to find affordability. And some households and some family members have moved out of the region altogether. It's also so difficult for younger people to even think about home ownership. We have the lowest rate of home ownership for people under age 35 in the nation. And we've also heard from so many business owners, small and large, about how difficult it is for them to hire and retain workers, especially in the fields of healthcare and education and hospitality. So it's no surprise that voters tell us over and over in the last few years that the thing that they care about most, the thing they're most concerned about, is housing unaffordability and homelessness. So we have our mandate and we know what the issues are. And since BAHFA operationalized in February of 2022, we were a little delayed because of COVID, but we're up and running as of 2022. We have been hard at work putting the pieces together to move forward with a regional housing measure. So we have created an equity framework and a funding programs document, which form the guiding principles for our future expenditure program. We have created an organizational and sustainability plan. We've been out, as I said, to so many organizations and entities, over 70 plus over the last year, Bay Area wide. We have ballot measure polling in progress. And we're going to take all that information and put it all together so that starting in Q1 of 2024, we'll have a full business plan. We'll have draft ballot documents for our governing boards to consider. And we'll have a BAHFA expenditure plan. And BAHFA will retain a portion of the revenue that we raise. And I'll talk more about that later. So we will be presenting this information at a series of meetings to our governing boards through Q1 and Q2, and that we hope to get, when all is done, to June of 2024, when our governing boards will approve a resolution to place the ballot measure on the 9 counties' ballots for November of 2024. And here you can see how powerful this is. For the first time ever, every single jurisdiction in our region will have an unprecedented amount of funds to address these housing needs. And you'll see that every county gets a direct allocation, as well as the 3 big cities that's in our statute. So Oakland and San Jose, in addition, of course, to San Francisco. Also, the city of Napa and the city of Santa Rosa get a direct allocation. And that's because they carry 30% or more of their county's very low income regional housing needs allocation. BAHFA will retain 20% of the funds we raise. And that is to help create the systems change that can outlast these bond funds. And just to, again, for those who haven't seen this presentation before and don't know about BAHFA, the way in which the money is allocated and what our requirements are is in the Housing Act, our Bay Area Affordable Housing Finance Act. 80% of the funds we raise per that legislation go back to the county of origin according to assessed property values. And most of the money needs to be spent on new housing, new production, so at least 52%. There's another 15% that should be spent on affordable housing preservation, and that's for the purpose of anti-displacement and homelessness prevention, and to keep people in the communities where they live now and where they may have grown up. A full 28% of the city and county allocations are flexible funds. And this really is part of the beauty of our legislation. It recognizes that there's a lot of diversity in the Bay Area between counties. So counties will have, working with their cities, a lot of discretion about whether they want to put that money into new housing or maybe more preservation or maybe housing related uses. BAHFA has similar rules, except we'll allocate 10% of our funds to a local government grant program, and we'll be working with local jurisdictions to define the parameters of that program. And then you'll see that both the cities and counties and BAHFA have a 5% allocation for tenant protections with an asterisk. And that is because our constitutional currently only allows the use of GO bonds for the acquisition and improvement of real property. Services, tenant protections do not fit into this category. There may be the possibility that those eligible uses will be slightly expanded, in which case we may be able to actually deliver on those protection dollars. But we have other plans for protection if that is not the case. Specifically with regard to the use of GO bond funds, we had very significant legislative movement this year, and that was that Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1 passed, which would lower the voter threshold for affordable housing bonds from 2/3, where it is now, to 55%. This is a significant change for us, and would be very beneficial. We'd be able to take advantage of that. It will be on the November 2024 ballot, as will our bond, we hope. And we believe that the ACA 1 is likely to be amended before it is put before voters in November of 2024. And that's the area where it's possible there could be a modest expansion of eligible uses that could enable some tenant protections to be paid for with GO bonds. But we will see the outcome of that process. So I do want to talk a little bit about BAHFA's role. And we've heard from a lot of people, well, if you're distributing 80% of the funds to the jurisdictions, why are you retaining 20? Why not just put all of the money right back into the counties where the money came from? And the reason is this, that we have an opportunity to create essentially a public mortgage bank, a regional lending entity that can provide benefits for our region long after the bond funds are spent. BAHFA is an investment in our region's future. So we will take our allocation, our 20% of the bond funds, and we'll begin making construction and permanent loans to affordable developments at very good terms, in addition to subsidy loans as well. And then over time, we'll earn interest on those loans and build financial strength. So starting in year 10 or so, taking that strong balance sheet, that strong financial strength, we can go and borrow, we'll go to the capital markets and borrow new pools of funding to loan to projects that do not rely on our regional taxpayers to pay off. This income that we earn then can go back into communities and back into projects as subsidies and to fund housing programs. So when you think about the way that we finance housing development now, we work with banks. They've been very good partners, but they earn interest and fees, and they take money out of our communities. They distribute it to shareholders and to their executives. BAHFA, as a public mortgage bank, can step into that role and take those interest and fees again, with very good terms for our developments, and reinvest in our communities. Take that money and create new subsidies that do not rely on taxpayer support. And we know this works because there are several excellent models of these public mortgage banks around the country. New York City's Housing Development Corporation is one such successful model. And this is just a very high-level graphic which demonstrates how this works. And this is really how this works. And it's really BAHFA's goal over time. And that is, we'll make loans, assist the developments with great terms. We'll earn interest and fees. We'll be able to use that collateral to borrow money. And then we will repay the loans in the way that the banks take their loans are paid now. But instead of the interest and fees going out, it stays in our system. It stays in our system as perhaps tenant protection funding, certainly project subsidies. So we're really excited about this process. We're really excited about hitting the ground running after the bond passes, making great investments throughout the community, and then building BAHFA into a strong regional agency that will have a wide systemic long-term beneficial effect. We are in the process of finalizing our planning and our documents now. We are polling, as I said. We'll be going to our governing boards starting in January and February of 2024. And we will be putting this all together so that by June we can have a resolution on the issue, and then take all the preparatory steps necessary through the summer and the fall until we get to November of 2024. And I am very happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. We have a few of you from organizations that have asked to make some comments. So if you'll just enter the name of your organization into chat, we'd be happy to call on you. And I would like to first call on Tracy Edwards. She's co-president of Cupertino Sunnyvale and also a former state board president who has some knowledge about bond oversight. Tracy, hopefully you are unmuted and we can go ahead and ask your question and talk to Kate about this.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me just amend my CV a little bit. I was the VP for the state board, not the president. First, Kate, thank you very much for this presentation. And just as a little bit of background, I serve on the Santa Clara County Measure A Oversight Committee. And we take great pride in that we were reviewed by the civil grand jury, something you never want to say you have been, but got a great outcome from that review. And as a result of that experience, I have learned a lot about the dynamics of development and the costing, and now the increased complexity of stacking the financial elements of putting a project together, probably having, 10 or more years ago, gone from 3 or 4 up to 10, 12, maybe even more, making it incredibly complex and lengthy in getting a development off the ground. Sorry, this prelude is so long. And one of the things that is pretty critical, 2 things, let me say, that were pretty critical that we noted in Santa Clara County was a really strong citizens oversight. That made a big difference. That put pressure on the Board of Supervisors, that called out a number of things. And I have some observations around why we were able to operate differently than some other bond oversight committees. So that's one of my questions. It was kind of responded to, but I didn't think quite as much as it should have been in the chat. So I have a strong feeling about a really good citizens oversight committee. And I don't know, based on the structure of the distribution of the proceeds, whether that's going to happen at the destination of the funds, or whether it's going to be comprehensive over BAHFA altogether, not BAHFA, excuse me, the bond measure altogether. That's part one. And part two is critical for the Bay Area to be successful in this, is to have some level of significant reform on the distribution of low-income tax credits to the Bay Area, which is badly scored based on the state system that looks for financial efficiency as measured often by cost per unit, which we fail miserably in the Bay Area. So we need more credits. The scoring system needs to change. That is political reform. So two questions I'm asking you: oversight, and also what are we doing to try to transform the credit allocation system?
Tracy, thank you first for your service on the Citizens Advisory Committee. That's a labor of love, I know, because I reported to the San Francisco Citizens Advisory Committee for a couple of bonds that we did, and it's really important work, and so thank you. BAHFA has very strict reporting requirements. So every year we have to report to the state legislature on a description of the projects funded, their household served by income level, the extent to which we have met our 3P targets. In addition, we have to take forward to our governing bodies an expenditure plan every year, which does the same reporting. And we have an advisory committee, as well as a BAHFA oversight and a ABAG housing committee that we report to, as well as our BAHFA board and the ABAG executive board. So there's a lot of public meeting time and transparency. But if ACA 1 passes, that has, in addition, a citizens advisory committee component. And so I believe, and I haven't talked to the lawyers about this, but I believe that the way ACA 1 is written, and if, assuming we would take advantage of that, that we would then have that oversight committee as part of our process. So I believe it would be for the totality of the bonds, and because we have to report on the totality of the bonds. All of the jurisdictions have to also report to us annually. And we do that reporting, so there's full transparency. So we haven't worked out all the details of that, but I think that that is would be a good way for that to ensure accountability across the board. And then there's nothing stopping a separate jurisdiction from having their own oversight work as well. And then tax credit reform. I would say two things. Right now, tax exempt bonds are not oversubscribed. If you want to get credits and bonds, you basically have an over-the-counter funding allocation. That's because interest rates have gone up and many projects that once were feasible are no longer feasible. The second thing is that I am firmly committed to advancing more cost-effective housing. We know it's possible. We have mountains of evidence of safe, decent, attractive, well-maintained, well-managed, 100% leased up housing that does not cost $1 million a door. And we as a region really need to do some work on prioritizing more cost effectiveness in our housing, because we need to produce more and it will help us to address homelessness. But having said that, there's lots of room for reform at CIDLAC and TCAC and at the state level. Those are for those who don't know, CIDLAC and TCAC are the place that we get tax exempt bonds, CIDLAC, California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, and low-income housing tax credits. That's the California Tax Allocation Committee. Those are the two main vehicles for funding all our affordable housing in the entire country. Each state has their own entity that creates the rules for their allocation of those resources. And it's an inefficient system. We could do a lot better. We, BAHFA, have proposed changes to the state leadership. And again, I think that we all need to come together and do those two things at once, both work on cost control, and then secondly, work together to create change at the state system that will create more efficiency and make those dollars go farther. But there's a lot of individual agendas driving those discussions. And so it's not without its challenges.
And Kate, I'll just maybe add one more comment. I think I hope what you've said is right about we can build it for less, but all the trend lines are desperately hitting $1 million a door. And not made worse most recently by the massive increase in insurance costs. So where I serve on another affordable housing board, worked really hard at reducing costs only to be defeated by 100% increase in our insurance costs. So there's lots working against affordable housing. And every lever needs pulled. And I think we can hope for reduction in cost per unit, but we have to accept that we have to plan for that higher cost, right? And design in systems that permit us to build in that higher cost environment, including all the time delays it takes because of the increased number of financing groups that have to get involved in every single project.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Tracy. And actually, I believe Erin Pang has entered that she's from Save the Bay. So it looks like she's still muted. Could somebody please unmute Erin? And Erin, would you go ahead again and a brief comment, please? But we thank you very much. And we as a League Bay Area Board follow the work of Save the Bay. Go right ahead, Erin.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for the presentation. I'm Erin Pang. I'm a policy associate with Save the Bay. And I don't have a question, but just wanted to give a quick comment in support of this housing bond measure. Save the Bay is one of the largest regional nonprofits working to protect the SF Bay for people and wildlife. And one of our priorities right now is climate resilience in the Bay Area, which includes ensuring that everyone has access to safe, affordable housing. And we all know low-income communities and communities of color are going to be hit the hardest by the climate crisis. So we think affordable housing is really necessary to shelter folks from the increased flooding and heat and wildfires that will become more extreme with climate change. And we also really appreciate that the housing bond will prioritize housing development near public transit, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions and pollution and allows people easier commutes to work. And also wanted to say we appreciate that some of the bond will go towards preserving existing affordable housing, which will allow people to stay in their homes and their communities and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions from construction. So yeah, just wanted to offer our comment in support of the bond measure.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that, and we'll look forward to more dialogue as the Bay Area Board goes through its decision-making process. And there was one other organization, and I just found you and I lost him. I believe his name is Rashida. His or her name, Rashida, where are you? If we can unmute Rashida.
Hello.
Oh, please go right ahead, Rashida.
Thank you for that presentation. My name is Rashika Rawat and I work at Greenbelt Alliance. We are a regional environmental organization that works to educate, advocate, and collaborate to achieve a more resilient and equitable region. And we are also a member of the Bay Area Housing for All Coalition. I'm here to express our support for BAHFA to create housing solutions across the region, also while targeting the highest need populations and unlocking the current pipeline of affordable housing developments and reaching scale and sustainability over the long term. On a personal note, I'm a recent college graduate and I have seen firsthand how hard it is to move back to my hometown of Sunnyvale due to the cost of living. Most of my friends and I are unable to afford to live on our own, and many of my friends have not returned after college due to the high rent prices. We need more housing to make sure that people of all ages and income levels can afford to live here. We're really eager for the bond to move forward and for the impact that it's going to make in our communities. And we are in very strong support of it, and we hope you are too.
Thank you very much, Rashida. Rashika, I think I finally said it right, didn't I? Thank you. And again, if any other organizations are out there, we ask you to enter your name into the chat so we can recognize you. I have some questions that came in advance, and Kate, I'd like to go for one of those right now. And again, this is from folks in San Mateo County. What will the process for individuals, cities, developers, lenders, basically anyone, to voice disagreement with the administration of the bond funds?
Well, there's two avenues to make your disagreement or thoughts, comments, concerns known. One is with respect to funds, the 80% of the funds that are distributed to the jurisdictions. So if you are in San Mateo County and you don't like the process by which that county has decided to distribute its funds, then there are electoral avenues to make your voice heard. The Board of Supervisors of the county must have a noticed hearing of its expenditure plan. I work closely with the housing staff in San Mateo County, and they're all really great and responsive and very knowledgeable. And so I know that they're in the process now of doing outreach and really listening to needs of individual cities. But it's in the same way that any public policy that a county may put forward, there's opportunities for citizen input. That would be the same for the bond. If the complaint is with BAHFA, then we have avenues for making your voice heard too. We want to be very responsive to people, but we also have governing boards that have representation across the Bay Area. The ABAG Executive Board, as well as the BAHFA Board, which is comprised of the same membership as the MTC Commission. So all of those members are responsive to their communities. They're all responsive to the general public. And we would want to hear from people, whether directly to BAHFA staff or through the governing board process.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask a question here that has come up in several different ways. And after you finish this, I'm going to ask you to talk about why the 80-20% split. But let's start first with this, because I've had it from about 4 people now. Is there any requirement that the counties distribute the funds equitably across all the cities in that county? Or does the county retain complete discretion in deciding which cities get the funds?
Our Housing Act was amended this legislative session, and part of that amendment was to make very explicit what we already wanted to require, which is that in the creation of the county expenditure plan, they must demonstrate outreach. They must conduct and demonstrate outreach that they have been in communication with and heard the housing needs of every single city in the county. And so BAHFA right now is providing technical assistance to all the county staff in order to facilitate that communication. We've provided template staff reports and template PowerPoint presentations and template communications programs, because we want to make sure that every city's housing needs are considered. We're also encouraging the cities to make their voices heard at the county level and together. And we're seeing very positive responses. The county staff that we're working with are, their programs are underway, their outreach is underway. And we've presented to most all of the boards of supervisors in the region, not all, but most all. And they've heard loud and clear from their city peers that how important this is. So there are a variety of ways in which the bond funds can be distributed. It could be per capita. It could be according to RENA obligations within the cities. It could be according to a priority list that the cities contribute to. They all come together. For example, prioritizing shovel-ready projects. There are many in our region, may be a good way to go, and if the cities can agree on that. So we are going to require that the county's planning demonstrates that it has fulfilled that statutory requirement.
Thanks, Kate. And again, I'm sure you've said this 1,000 times by now, but I know that 80% and 20% that are what are called regional funds that are not returned to source was in the enabling legislation, but there still seems to be some confusion out there. Could you just, I know you had it in your presentation, but could you discuss again that those 80% funds that are allocated to the county have very counties or the cities that are entitled to direct allocation, they have some pretty strict requirements on them for how their funds get allocated. Could you just touch on that again so folks feel reassured?
Sure. So the 80% return to source must meet those minimum spending percentages that I went through. So at least 52% of all the funds that the city or county receives has to be for new construction. Also, there is one other qualification to that new construction funding as well, that within that pool of at least 52%, that the jurisdiction must prioritize projects that meet its extremely low income, very low income, and low income regional housing needs allocation goals. So the legislation is written in such a way that we can really, we need to together prioritize housing for those who need it most. There's the 15% minimum for preservation, and then 28% of the funds are flexible, but within the rubric of the legislation, so that if you're investing in housing, it must have a deed restriction. The maximum income level of the household you serve is 120% for the counties. And so it's not there's flexibility in the sense that some counties may want to do farm worker housing, some may want to do 8-story multifamily in urban infill. Some counties may want to do down payment assistance loans. Some may focus on permanent supportive housing for homeless households. There's within that framework, there's a wide variety of investments that can be made at the discretion of the jurisdictions, but it is still within a framework of the 3 Ps.
Thanks.
BAHFA has the same framework.
All right, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you there.
That's okay.
Question that was submitted in advance, not by me. Some folks familiar with San Jose will know that we just did a cost of residential development study reported out to City Council. And this is a little bit of a follow-up to Tracy's points. This person says, my city has 3 affordable housing projects approved, ready to go. And developers are saying they will not begin until interest rates, labor costs, etc., decrease. And that sounds like never. Are there safeguards, timelines for the use of funds? How does that, how does that all work? If you could talk a little bit about the time you give folks to spend the money once they're awarded.
We don't want to draw funds down from the general obligation bond that aren't put to use because the taxpayers are paying for them. So we will be working with all of the county staff and the city staff to understand exactly what projects they can move forward in a 3-year period. That's the general rule of thumb for a general obligation bond, that from the date of issuance, you want those funds in construction or at least encumbered and moving towards construction within 3 years. Now, the direct allocation cities have a slightly longer time frame, 5 years to spend their funds. And then if they're showing progress toward expenditures, then they can get an extension on that time, but they'll work with their counties if there's some delay that's preventing those direct allocation cities from spending funding. But we know that there are projects throughout the region that are ready to go, that if they have access to tax credits and bonds, those main funding sources that we talked about earlier, and they have a new source of gap funding from the bonds, they can move forward. And we want to see those move out, and we'll size that first draw, assuming a 3-year period for the encumbrance of those funds.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask a question that from a rather frustrated person who's probably looking at her tax bill or his tax bill. And basically the question's simple. Why is it always a parcel tax? And I know you had some choices. Could you talk about the decision-making process within MTC ABAG? And I just, for folks who don't know and want to check out MTC ABAG, the decisions are made by elected officials from throughout the 9 counties. So if you could just touch on that a little bit again, why the parcel tax?
Well, so I just want to distinguish a general obligation bond measure from a parcel tax. The bonds are paid by property owners, taxpayers, and then we'll take that ongoing payment that they make and we'll go and issue bonds against it. And the reason that we chose that was because it's very straightforward. It produces the most immediate money with a relatively lower impact on property owners. You can also do a parcel tax year by year that you can also bond against, but it tends to raise a much lower amount of money. And then our other options were what's called a head tax, a tax on the number of employees in businesses around the region, as well as a gross receipts tax. And post-COVID, with the economic dislocations that were happening The employee head tax and gross receipts taxes seemed like options that would be very difficult to advance. And again, they also raise lower levels of funding. So with our housing need where it is, with the economic effects of housing unaffordability, as we discussed, businesses closing because they can't staff they can't attract workforce, people moving out of the area. We wanted to choose a revenue measure that would have the most significant impact we could, but we are very cognizant also about the impact on property owners, and we want to keep that as contained as possible.
Roma, if I could just jump in real quick, just
Oh,
to.
go right ahead, Barry. Identify yourself and who you're with and go right ahead.
Hi, everybody. Barry Barnes with Team Civics Consulting, and we're working supporting some allies related to the bond measure. I also think it's important. I mean, Kate was spot on, but a couple other points real quickly on this are that a parcel tax, as Kate mentioned, does not raise the same amount of money that Measure AA, which I'm sure many of you remember for the Bay Restoration Authority, which I had the pleasure to work on. That was $12 a parcel, but only $150 million total over the life of it, which is a fraction of what would be needed for something like this. And the second point is that when it comes to equitable, the way the taxation happens from an equity perspective, a general obligation bond measure is more equitable because it's not a flat rate as Measure AA was, where as much as that was the best measure for the best time that had voter support, it's still somebody with one small lot paid the same as a corporation with one big lot. If a parcel was a parcel, and same with the sales tax, which is frequently called out with people who have concerns about equity and the nature of that. So it is that's another reason that we found that people gravitate toward the bond measure. It certainly it costs, nobody likes to pay that, but it is on the same lines as school bond measures, which I think pretty much all of us are paying, where it's based on the assessed valuation of the home. And for those in pre-Prop 13 homes, again, that's the assessed value and not the market value. Thanks, Roma.
Oh, no,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you so much. And Kate, this is a quick one. It's just how can you pay for, essentially it's a question about administrative costs. And I'm trying to find it, but again, I believe there's a set aside for administrative costs. Could you just mention that?
Yes, we can use up to 5% of the bond funds for the costs of implementing the bond. So if you will need a project manager, for example, to work with developers on the loans and the underwriting of a project and the getting the money out the door, construction draws, that kind of thing. So we can use bond funds for those purposes, up to 5%.
Okay, thank you. So it's capped at 5%. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And this is one that it mentions 350 SF and 350 BA. I'm not quite sure what Alina means here, but it is an issue I'm familiar with from San Jose's Housing Community Development Commission, because we're looking at impacts of cost on projects, existing projects, electrification, soft story retrofit, etc., installing electric heat pumps. Could you just talk a little bit more about what these funds can be used for? I know we talk about tenant protections are allowed, I believe. I know that there are restrictions on geo bonds, sticks and bricks, if I recall the right phrase. Could you kind of touch on maybe how the broadness of how this measure the funds can be applied?
We want to work with developers and on preservation projects that conduct great rehabs of the developments. There are some things to consider. We don't want people to have to move out for any length of time in order to do a rehab. We want to prioritize the protection of tenants so that we want to make sure that the first priority of our spending is to keep people housed. So if there's any risk of imminent displacement, we want the money to go into that kind of development. But to the extent we can do a environmentally sustainable component of a rehab and while protecting tenants, we most certainly want to work with developers to achieve that.
Thanks. And I see a question from Maxine where she's asking if all revenues for production, will they be affordable housing, not market rate? And I think I can safely say yes.
That's right.
I believe I can answer that one. So thank you. Also, I am just scanning to see, because we're getting down to the last 5 minutes. Actually, we've had some questions about, you touched on ACA 1, that there is a possibility to expand those uses, and that if ACA 1 passes and lowers the threshold to 55%, that means that the BAHFA bond measure will only require 55% to pass. Correct?
That's right.
Okay. Now, could you talk just a little bit? We've had several questions. Will this really help homelessness? Is this, are we really going to see something move? And without getting too much into the weeds of tiny houses and rapid rehousing and all that, could you just talk a little bit about what you see it can help with homelessness, and then touch again on the sustainability aspect? I love it when you talk about the New York model. So if you could just talk about that, I'd like to listen to that part.
I love talking about the New York model too. Yes, this bond will definitely help homelessness. If you have read the brilliant UCSF report that just came out in the last couple months with the lead author, Dr. Margot Kuchel, you know that one of the main conclusions is that, and we've seen the research on this in other areas, is that homelessness in large part is a housing problem. We need more affordable housing. We have people who become homeless every year and self-resolve, and people who can't self-resolve. If we had more affordable housing, we would have far less of that precarity that causes homelessness. Because people, for obvious reasons, if your housing is affordable and your roommate moves out, then you can limp along for a few months and pay the rent until you can find a new roommate. Well, that's very difficult with housing prices where they are. So that's the first thing. We need more housing, and we need more affordable housing. In addition, BAHFA will be prioritizing permanent supportive housing. So we intend to work with every housing authority, every federal program, and every other way we can to bring together the operating subsidies and services dollars needed to create those extremely low income and permanent supportive housing units. Now, we really need the federal government to make the big change in this area. But short of that, you can do mixed income developments where you have households at 80% of area median income who pay higher rents, and they support people who only can pay 30 or are at 30% of area median income. So that's one way. But also there are subsidy programs that we all will take advantage of, but we will deliver the capital dollars to build the housing that's so necessary. So without that capital without those capital dollars, then you can't, that's the first step forward. And then we'll piece together the operating expenses and services. It makes it all possible, but we do need more help, that's for sure. The sustainability question, Roma, is really going back to that point of how do we create something that will have lasting effect? How do we do something that moves beyond the need for every 10 years having to go back to the taxpayers with another request? If BAHFA becomes the public mortgage bank that we intend it to be, and we can reinvest our interest and fees into projects, we will create a new, steady, permanent source of subsidy that will help these deals that Tracy mentioned that are stuck because they need a little more housing. Excuse me, they need a little more subsidy to get over the hump. We can really do that and be a self-supporting agency at the same time. And the reason we know we can do it is because we have these excellent examples across the country. And it's not just the New York City HDC. I think many of you may have read in the New York Times that recently that great article on the Montgomery County public housing that is, they're doing great work. So there's proof of concept out there, and BAHFA is really excited to embark on this project and provide this long-lasting benefit to the Bay Area.
I think that's a perfect spot. We know that, Kate, you have a hard stop at 7, and I know that we've just begun this. I wanted to thank you, Kate, for your comprehensive and very informative presentation and analysis. And thank you, attendees, for your questions, insights, and commentary. This is just the beginning. Note that during our Bay Area League's November 27th board meeting, we will take a preliminary step regarding BAHFA's affordable housing bond measure by deciding whether to support it in concept only. And then we plan to closely follow the work of the various MTC ABAG committees over the next few months, and especially those first meetings beginning in January with details of BAHFA's full business and expenditure plans and the resolution to place the bond in California on county ballots. Additional opportunities we're going to provide for your input. We're planning those for early in 2024, but prior to any final decision the Bay Area Board makes to support the ballot measure. Throughout this process, though, don't hesitate to send any questions or comments to our lead here, Director Roma Dawson, and we'll make sure that her email is in whatever we send to you. Now, again, this presentation has been recorded and will be made available on our website and sent to you, anyone who's registered. And on our website, you're going to find other available materials and resources because other meetings have been done and where you can see other recordings. We have this hard stop. We want to again thank you. But if you feel that there are some questions or comments that you want to make sure on this recording, we can stick around for another 15 minutes while Kate gets time off for good behavior, and we'll go from there. So thank you again, and I guess raise your hand if there's something you want to say.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters. We really appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Let's see. I saw Alex Starr. What's your comment?
Well, I put a couple of questions in there about oversight. Will she have a chance? Will somebody forward the questions that are in the chat to her?
Oh, yes.
Okay, then she'll answer them, that way. That's fine.
Yeah, Alex, we'll make sure that she gets answered. And Kathleen, I see a raised hand from where did you go? Pierluigi Oliverio?
Yes.
Former San Jose City Council member and a league member. So can we unmute?
I'm unmuted.
All righty, go for it.
Just on that last comment that someone mentioned about oversight, I have never seen any taxpayer group invited to be part of the oversight process. And I know it's probably viewed as risky, but typically the oversight board is made up of people very friendly to the initiative. So, when you're looking at managing the potential opposition, stating that you might have one seat available to a taxpayers association board might go help significantly. And then on the other topic, I know it's between 10 and 20 billion and I joined late. I'm just curious, what's the standard approximate financing cost of the bond? So does 10 billion, if that's what the number was, turns into 14 billion?
Well, I'm going to answer to the best of my recollection. And remember that I don't have the figure in front of me, but I believe I have read that it could be about $100. Now they're polling right now, and then the results of that poll are being done by folks that I have no access to, so I can't give any polling results, but that will probably have an effect on it. And I see Jim, if there's anybody on this call that actually knows more or can recall the exact amount, and I don't know Jim Davis, but I see his hand up, so maybe we could let Jim.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got that microphone off now. Jim Davis, I'm a former member of the Sunnyvale City Council. I served on the ABAG Executive Committee for 3 years, and I am currently sitting on the Housing and Human Services Commission in the city of Sunnyvale. And I am not speaking on behalf of the commission, but we have not heard anything about BAHFA, and I'm appalled because I think that this is going to be a fantastic measure. How are we getting this word out to the cities?
Jim, I wish we still had Kate here because I've been asking those same questions. And actually, I think we've met, haven't we, Jim?
I think so.
We've met, sir. So my apologies. I do know you. And you've been very active and knowledgeable about MTC ABAG. I wish you were a league member.
That could be a possibility.
I wish we could use your advice right now. We're working on a regional government study headed up by Kathleen, and I think I may have even mentioned that to you. Actually, Kate is just now starting a lot of outreach. Supposedly, she has convened housing staff from all of the cities, or most of the cities, certainly the larger ones, and is starting rounds of elected officials. But she will soon become the busiest woman on the planet, because she's got 9 counties. I mean, there's 11 just in the city of San Jose. I believe she's doing the best she can to work her way through it. But I'm hoping, and I think Kathleen is hoping, that maybe the league can play an educational role here and help out. And you have a very active league, and you had some people from your local league on the call, Jim.
Good.
We'll make sure that she hears that you haven't heard about it, to kind of speed up that process.
I can guarantee you they will hear about it tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Kathleen, I'm looking to see any other raised hands. I don't see any. Do you see any?
No, I do not.
I got about 23 people hanging in there, though.
I think Pierluigi Oliverio, did you want to say again? Did you have another comment?
Yeah, I don't think, Roma, I think you missed because you said it's something of $100. So, and we may not know the answer on the call, but when you issue general obligation bonds, you have to pay the financing fees. And so my question is, if you geo bond 10 billion or 20 billion, what's the actual payback cost? Because it's much larger than that, and I don't know what it is offhand.
Yeah, and I don't either. And we are going to take some of these questions back. Actually, for those of you left on the call, we still got 23 of you. I think one of the things Kathleen and I are working on is what type of educational programs or forums would be helpful for our league members. And we know league folks are intensely interested in public access to the information and getting the word out. So as League Bay Area, Kathleen, jump in if I'm wrong, but I believe it'll be our responsibility to write up the pros and cons, regardless of our position. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Yeah. So we will be, obviously, it's our responsibility as the ILO, interleague organization for the 9 counties, to thoroughly dive into. And Pierluigi, you would be great to help with that.
Sure. And then the other follow-along question, and I think that's what you were answering, is on the polling. They're currently polling what the threshold of people are willing to accept, and that's whether it's going to be 10 billion or 20 billion, and eventually there'll be some dollar amount per 100,000.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what's gonna happen. Interestingly enough, and actually Kate didn't touch on this in the presentation tonight, but in about the third week in January, what are being called final documents are supposed to be ready to come forward with the actual ballot language and a lot of other information. It goes first to an ABAG committee, and then it works through. There's so many ABAG committees and MTC committees, but there's a joint committee that is the BAHFA Oversight Committee and the ABAG Executive Committee that are the step right before it goes to the full BAHFA board, which is the same as the board of MTC. So it's a little bit complicated, but there's a clearly laid out process for putting it on, actually for the steps needed to put it on the ballot. And it looks like they'll have the decision done by the end of March. And that's just me second guessing, looking at various documents that have been presented to the committees. But that's one thing we're trying to track closely.
And we'll be sending that PowerPoint to you all. And note that I know that you came in late, but there is an actual slide that shows exactly the timeline about all these decision makings there. So that'll be very helpful. And note, that's one of the things we're going to be doing is very closely monitoring all of these different meetings and issuance and language and what goes on next. So it's going to be an interesting time coming forward so that we can give you, and when we do a pros and cons, the best possible kind of analysis and insight so that we can move it forward.
Yeah, and by the way, if your local lead for those, wow, we've still got 16 people. I am trying to reach out to every single local in the Bay Area that has an active housing committee. I see Eric, who's a board member, on the call, and I know Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville has a very active housing committee. So, or even if your action committee follows housing issues, and I'll probably try to convene some of those folks once some of those final staff reports come out, and maybe dive into the weeds a little bit of what's starting to come forward. But that'd probably happen early February would be that's a guesstimate, but in early February. So please, you've all got my email, so stay in touch.
It looks like we'll take our final question before we end our evening. Maxine Turner.
Thank you. This has been interesting, but I must say I'm still confused on what to me is the fundamental issue or reason for the bond for affordable housing. And it's not clear to me whether all the money will go to housing that's 100% affordable, or for what our current affordable housing locally is. If you're lucky if you get 10% of a project. So could somebody clarify for me if this is going to be on the ballot with language that says an affordable housing bond, that 100% of all the money, whether it's for production or when it goes back to the counties and then they come up with production, that it will only be used for 100% affordable housing. Is that what I heard you say before?
It all has to be used for affordable housing. So the only part of the bonds that can be spent are for affordable housing. Now, as you know, the categories of affordable housing vary because they're
that's no problem. I understand that, but it will not be just a mark, because there's so much language, and I have read the details on the BAHFA website, and it talks about housing. So if they say we have a 10% affordable housing project, will that be eligible for the BAHFA bond money, or is it have to be at least 70% affordable? That's what I'm trying to understand, because
we'll make sure we get that question answered for you. And I'm trying to remember on the BAHFA website it has the original legislation. I think it was AB 1467 or something. At any rate, there is a fact sheet there, and it might be in that fact sheet, but I think that's a really important question. So in other words,
because it does talk, I mean, and that's why I'm asking it, and that's through very bad experiences locally as someone who supports affordable housing, to see developers get away with just building what they want and putting a few units and calling it an affordable project. So I think it's an important, and particularly if the ballot language is going to say this is for affordable housing, then we need ballot integrity, which is another important league accountability, transparency value. So I'm really counting on the league to be able to get into some of these fine points. And I've read too much about just housing and not when they actually talk about the production side. So Roma, if you've got my email, because I sent you an email, if you could answer that and get back to me, I'd very much appreciate it.
I will, and I'll also send you, I'm on the state's on the state's legislation team to look at state bills for housing and homelessness. And I've got, I should have, in fact, I'll send you the analysis done by all of the committees and the link to the original legislation. I think that might ease some of your concerns if you actually read the original legislation.
Let me say this, and the legislation she's referring to is Assembly Bill 1487. And there are general rules for cities and counties. All housing must be deed restricted, but term of restriction is not defined. All housing must be affordable with a cap of 120% AMI. Rental, ownership, and interim housing are eligible, and everything must conform to the expenditure plan, which is why we'll be looking at what their expenditure plan will be and for that ballot measure.
But
and the percent of the affordability in the total project. Thank you.
That proportional question, but you know what's really interesting is for the 80% of the funds. Kate had a slide that shows the percentage breakdown that's in the enabling legislation, but there's a lot of detail that's going to be decided at the county level. And there is a time period, once the bond measure passes, they've only got, I think, 60 days or something. It might be 90 days, I think, to actually develop the expenditure plan. And then they've got to notice the public meeting where it's adopted 30 days in advance. So really it's 60 days to come up with an expenditure plan within each county. So that's part of assuming that the bond measure passes, we'll be ready to do, legal be ready to help do some education to all our locals to say, okay, now you got to get to your county, or in the case of San Jose and Oakland, to your city. But for most of us, it's to the county. I think Santa Rosa, there are a few cities that Santa Rosa and Napa get a direct allocation because of the percentage they're required for RENA on the low income side. And I'm sorry, memory's not what it used to be, so I don't have all those details memorized.
No, you guys have been great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, no, Maxine, and thank you for your question. I'm glad you said something, because I confess I didn't really understand your question. So.
Yeah, no, I know it's and the language, I think when you go back, you'll see how many times it's referred to as housing.
Yeah.
As opposed to, so, you know, the devil's in the details. Nobody knows that better than you.
Nobody knows that better than league people, huh?
Right.
And that's what we love to do, is dive in the details.
Anyway, thank you. It was a very informative and well-run meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Kathleen, I kind of need to go attend
Bye.
the family. I think.
Yeah. Goodbye, everyone.